There was a question that came up before that I wanted to get your specific takes on. Manny, we'll start with you, and we might just work along. You both got microphones. But have you ever seen a project where the perfect software was chosen, but still it failed to deliver? What went wrong?
So in terms of making sure the project is, we don't know whether we have chosen the right product or not until we start to see the value comes out of it. So it's going to be quite hard to tell you whether we have done the right project or not. But in terms of what are the value that we are getting out of it and measuring the KPI, it might suggest. And that's where we do the startup with the vendor evaluation of different technologies being considered and comparing against what their deliverables are. And that's where the industry background or sort of reference will comes into play. And that's where the challenge with the digital technology, because it's all new, you don't have a reference point to go back and get some more customer references so that you can confidently make a decision. So that's still a challenging in the new technology, I would say.
So part of that is it's really hard to tell what's perfect before it starts. Yeah, okay. Mark?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I guess the hardest types of software to implement are the ones where we ask people to do things differently. So if we're putting things in place that just give us more information, that's great, but what are we going to do with it? Or if it's something like T-Card, which fundamentally changes the way that people work together, that is much harder again, right? So the bigger that delta in terms of what are we asking people to change, that's where it comes into it. And if we think about these things as they often are, management brings these in for good reason, with good justification, but I think of them as a technology project or a technology introduction, when in fact it's actually a change management proposal. And so from my perspective, I would argue that let's look at what somebody mentioned, like what are we trying to achieve when we measure things? Let's go back to that. But also then, how's it going to impact on people? And this is where, like you mentioned, there are a myriad of different change frameworks like Kotter and you name it. ADCAR being one of the pro-size systems, or one of the many components of it. Any of those is better than none, right? And unfortunately, we see too many projects of this nature being introduced and run without some sort of a formal framework, or even somebody just sitting down and coming up with something is better than nothing. Leadership, support. If the change we're asking people to do, if it's going to impact the way they work more so than less, then we have to go further up that sponsorship chain to get that support. And then everything else, understanding what they need to learn and teaching people how to actually lead such projects.
So you can have the perfect software, but the soft stuff is the hard stuff.
Yep, thank you for that.
Dominic, we heard perfect software and T-Card in the same sentence before. What's your take on this?
Thanks for that, Mark. Appreciate it. Good shout out. I was really lucky. I experienced a failed software implementation really early on in my career. Lots of learnings. It was really nice because it wasn't my project that I was leading, which was even better. A few things that come to mind that are the reason why that project wasn't successful. One of them was that it was done in isolation. So it was one really smart person trying to implement something without the right engagement from the beginning. We've heard about that tonight. The second thing is they tried to do too much all at once and not in the right place. So we spoke a little bit about starting with the bottleneck. If you can unlock the bottleneck and improve the bottleneck at the beginning, it allows you to create that value, get a rung on the board, reinvest that value and receive additional investment to move that bottleneck downstream. The third one was just the lack of communication which occurred because it was in isolation. We spoke about that around stakeholder engagement. Okay,
it's a variety of things that play into it. There was a really good question earlier about centralisation and decentralisation. We often see mine sites push it from sites up into corporate and then back down, excuse me, a few years later. So in terms of standardising, is it better to be centralised or decentralised? I'll throw it back to you, Dom, if you want to start.
I'm going to say the metallurgical question, which is it depends. It depends on the challenges that exist at that organisation at the time. You've spoken about that cyclical nature. We've heard from Evolution, which is quite decentralised, although they are building a centralised team at the moment. It will be interesting to see how that plays out over time. Maybe, Manny, you can talk about that when you get your chance. I think MMG was a classic example of that, where it was quite decentralised, moved into centralised, and then went back to decentralisation. And I think that occurs for the right reasons. You could say that it's because McKinsey comes in and tells you that's what you should do. But it's because there are challenges that exist with decentralised organisations that start to come out. You need to address those. You might go to centralised, and there's problems that occur when you're centralised, and you need to address those, and you go decentralised. Is there a perfect model? Probably not, but understanding that challenges exist and that they emerge as you go is probably that first start of realising what you need to do, whether you go one way or the other.
Okay. Manny, did you want to jump in with Evolution and your experience?
Yeah, obviously with centralisation, decentralisation, it comes down to what we want to try and solve for the company, and what is the problem here. Because rather than going around, here is a technology or a software I have, how can I able to use that? So it should be the other way. I have a problem. How can this software or any software can help us? And to that fact, so Cowal and North Parks and Ernest Henry, Mount Rawdon and Red Lake, and Mangari, all the 6 different operations has got different needs, and they are in a different maturity. We spoke about in terms of the technology where they are, and they all have a different problems to tackle. So definitely I would say more around a decentralized approach. Even though when it comes to centralized, maybe some of the aspects can be considered, but it still need to be tailored specific to the site-based team and solution to the site-based needs.
Okay. So 2 for it depends. Mark, are you going to tie break or agree?
Well, my argument would be if a corporation exists for anything other than holding these assets, there's got to be more. And to me, the obvious thing is that they have to provide services. Like why would you reinvent the wheel for common things like time utilisation models is a classic one. We've been to operations where every single site has a slightly different time utilisation models. Good model. Good luck making any sort of benchmarking comparisons. There are so many different things where every single site reinvents the wheel and solves the problem again from first principles. And if there's anything wrong with first principles, but why waste time when we already time constraints? Let's solve it once and get it done. And these things aren't uncontentious. Like if you've ever been in a workshop for a corporation having multiple sites trying to agree on a standard time utilisation model, you know what I'm talking about. And yet at the end of the day, it just comes down to it. It's agree on something. So to me, software isn't much different on that. I would throw into that you can change configurations depending on what you need. So that might be a fairly localised thing and culturally sensitive as well. So that's the other thing that corporations need to take into account. And then the last thing I would say there is that it's important that fundamentally, the more of a personal stamp that every site and user can put onto the configuration, the more ownership there's going to be. If there's a thumbprint there that I can recognise, then I'm going to be using it more, right? They're the things you got to weigh up. But fundamentally, why wouldn't you centralise and not reinvent the wheel on everything?
Yeah.
Stanker, can I maybe throw you under the bus here? I've observed that Glencore Copper, and I think it was with the support of Glencore Technology via Paul Radulovic, went through a process of collecting metrics across the entire Glencore portfolio to set baseline benchmarks across operations, and then went through a process of trying to lift all of the sites to that level and create a bit of a community across the operation where people could ask an expert, I think is the sort of technique that was used. Would you be able to share any more about that, current state of that, whether it worked, up to what you can share?
Of course. Thanks, Dom. That program did begin probably about, I'd say, 2016, 17. And we had workshops of all the different sites, and this spanned all the mining, the metallurgical, as well as the processing or smelting and refining assets. COVID did actually put a dampener on the in-person meetings, and so we haven't actually held a combined session in person since COVID, but we have done online sessions which have been supported. Us at Glencore Technology were trying to wrangle all of the different sites to be able to contribute to this. The ownership of that platform, where we do have the sort of site support, that sort of passed between us and our sister company in Canada, which is XPS. They look after a lot of the site support stuff at the moment. It has become a repository of knowledge for a lot of the sites. Unfortunately, we haven't seen, with the loss of that in-person meeting, that sort of cross-collaboration has been a lot more difficult. And that is something that we've talked about being able to kick off, because I think that's critical to get that cultural buy-in. But definitely it allowed a lot of the sites to understand what others have done, and there is a place for that. But of course, we could always do better, and I think that's really a key thing.
And not just to shout out Glencore, but Dirk from Rio Tinto, I think you guys have done something quite similar in terms of the Ask an Expert. Is that right? You've got the different Slack channels where you can go out and ask the expert. Am I right with that? Just to show that we're not preferencing anyone in particular.
All right, thank you for that. What one piece of advice, if people take one thing away from this discussion, this event, this evening, what would you tell them when they're trying to make their next software rollout stick? So if they're looking at a rollout or in the middle of it, or they've rolled it out and they want it to stick, what would you advise? We'll start with Mark.
Sure. First of all, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What problem are we solving? Let's be really clear on that. And I think let's be really clear when we commit to buying this, because nothing's ever just a purchase, it's always a rental now from now till forever. And that's also important, because then we see leadership changes come in. They go, well, I don't understand what this thing does, and then throw it out, and it's crazy. So I'll be really clear on the why and communicate that really clearly, and then follow the steps of leadership, of change management that will guarantee success. It's a process. You guys in here all know about processes. We all process people. Yes, there are processes. This is not a new problem we're solving. Let's not solve it from first principles every single time. Let's just follow the formulas that have been proven to work.
Manny, what do you think?
Yeah, obviously, in my session I shared about three tips. But probably I'll still stay with.
If I pushed you for one,
yeah,
what's your number one?
Just number one. I got the three. I would say it's more about bringing the end user earlier in the rollout process. That will make the most impact and make it more stick and continue on. Yeah. So that's my.
Was that the iceberg of ignorance, getting the user and bringing that knowledge up?
Yeah. So they're bringing it 100% people who is close to the operations.
Yeah. They know what's going wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tom.
Just because I'm representing a Mets company, I'm going to probably say something around the lines of choose your partner wisely. Manny made two really good points when he was presenting. He spoke about making sure that it's a capability transfer approach that your partners are going with, not a dependency. You don't want to have 6 McKinsey people on site for the next 5 years on your operation. And then the second one that sort of stood out from partner selection is making sure that they're collaborative. Smart Mets companies knows that you're never going to lose market share to another Mets company. The market is so big that there's enough room for everyone. So companies that are prepared to partner and collaborate with their peers is a really important selection criteria when you're choosing a vendor.
Thank you, Dom. I think we're close to time. One more? Yeah? Okay. Does anyone have a question for any of our panellists whilst we're sitting here?
So just to understand is what you make, how do we make it stick? Yeah.
With a leadership change. So you've implemented, it's stuck, leadership changes or a key person changes. How do you sustain that change through the leadership?
I'll be honest, if there's a wholesale leadership change and the entire leadership team changes, it's very, very hard for that. In fact, there's almost no corporate memory then to actually understand what's going on. And the question would be, why would you change everyone at once? That's not a good idea, and it's not a good sign if that happens. But the bottom line to your question, I think, is that you try to operationalize it as much as you possibly can. And that might mean that you have to throw away the key to the old processes so that only this process can be used or this software can be used. And maybe with spreadsheets that we know are so busily used everywhere all the time, it's really hard to do. But I think it's a worthwhile process. And then maybe we need some sort of an audit process in place that from every 3 months or whatever the right frequency is, that we go and actually go and audit the effectiveness, and we have a set of criteria of how we are meant to use these things. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Manny, you talked about influence and control before, and it sounds like this is something that's out of control, but more something that's to be influenced. And I'll open it up to Dom and Manny if you want to comment a bit on any further on that, or any ideas how you keep change rolling through leadership, and especially wholesale leadership change.
Yeah, coming from an operational background, I strongly agree with Mark in terms of to make those changes stick, you need to have a KPI, and it needs to be business as usual. So it has to be rolled out, it's implemented in their operational strategy, and everybody knows, so it's in their training manual. And anyone comes to the new to the crew, it's part of their training competency. So it's pretty much just trying to make it as a business as usual. And if any new leaders comes in, that's the way we operate. So that's the best strategy to roll it on. The sooner we bring it into the BAU and roll it out and keep it as this is where we operate, would be the way to keep it the technology embedded in the system.
Make it as sticky as possible and as hard to remove as possible.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So nobody knows, like, there's something change has happened, like it's already the way we operate. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Dom, did you have a different perspective?
I don't have too much more to add, but I think it was Hans who asked about silos in mining and whether it's any worse in mining than other industries. I think that it is worse in other industries, and there's a dirty C word in mining, and it's not the word that you think, it's called customer. What we found is that we don't understand our customer well enough, and that could be external market, it could be within internally. So it could be your downstream unit operation, it could be an upstream unit operation. If you really understand what your customer needs, you can design your KPIs to fit that customer. And it comes back to this question as well, is that if you really understand your customer, and that might be a leader, and your leader changes, if you're delivering what your customer needs through that technology implementation ongoing, so that if you do turn it off, it risks that customer obtaining what they need, then that's a way to focus on how you get that technology to stick and become business as usual.
That was a great question. Thank you for that. Final question for the panel. We've talked a lot about change resistance, change fatigue. Where does this originate? Why don't people like change? Dom, do you want to start?
Yeah, I've got a belief that it's not that people don't like change, they don't like change done poorly, or don't like change done to them. And I think a few people have spoken about that already around the processes that we can take and some of the frameworks that we can utilise in order for it to feel like change is actually a pull and not a push. And if you can get to that stage of excellence in how you're introducing change, I think that's your nirvana, and that's what you should be striving for.
Mark, do you have anything different or to add on where change originates or what the big sticking factor is?
I think I highly agree with you on that, Dom, is that people don't like change being done to them. And we really have to go and ask them and involve them as much as possible as we can. Now, that's not always possible with some of the big, ERP projects. You can't go to every single last user because everyone's touched by these. But as much as possible, we've got to be creative and come up with ways and make people feel heard at the very least, so that they don't feel like it's being done to them, but they are part of it.
Yeah, obviously, I think Dom summarized it very well, and I agree with Mark in terms of having a say, like even though we can't able to ask them for the decision making, but having a consultative process of this is what we are trying to do, and getting their feedback, even though you're not acting on those feedback, let them give their opinion, and making them feel heard would be the way to go.
Yeah, all right, great, thank you. I think we're at time now, so thank you to the panellists for sharing their experience and their insights.